Aging is a journey shaped not only by our physical health, but also by our relationships, our communities, and the beliefs that give our lives meaning. In this episode of We're at the Age, we sit down with Reverend Dr. Julie Strassman, a hospice chaplain who brings compassion, wisdom, and a deep understanding to the human experience in her work with older adults and their families. Julie shares what she has learned from walking alongside people during some of life's most vulnerable moments, and we explore the important role that faith can play as we age. We talk about finding purpose, staying connected, and why strong communities are essential for older adults to thrive. Whether through congregation, a friendship, or a caring community, connection reminds us that we are not meant to navigate life's transitions alone. Julie's insights offer a meaningful look at how faith, relationships, and presence can support us through every season of life. Let's get into it. So what do you go by? Is it Dr. Julie? Is it Dr. Strassman? What do you prefer?
The full title is Reverend Dr. Julie Strassman, but just Julie is fine. Or
Okay,
if you want to be more formal, you can say Dr. Julie, but whatever you like.
Okay, great. Well, we love all of the titles. It's so fancy. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what you do for work right now?
Sure. So I work with Bethesda Hospice Care, where I'm the manager of support services. So I'm trained as a hospice chaplain, but I specialize in bereavement care. So in my current role, I supervise and support all of our social workers and our chaplains and our spiritual care interns, but I also provide all of our grief support for families who are grieving. And so I also work for Webster Hills United Methodist Church, where I run the Listening Place, which is a community grief support resource where folks can come in and receive free grief support.
Wow, that is a fascinating line of work. I'm curious what called you into ministry and for caring for people during these phases of life.
Well, I think like for most people, it came out of my own personal experience. So when I was about 30 years old, my godmother, who was really like a second mother to me, died very suddenly and unexpectedly. She had been ill, but we, really didn't expect her to pass away. And so when she did, it had a huge impact on me. She didn't really have family still living locally, so her sister Stephanie flew in from Florida. We had a week to clean out her apartment. She was cremated. We didn't have a funeral service, just kind of a dinner to remember her life. And then that was it. So, I really didn't have the opportunity to grieve in the way that you would normally grieve a mother. There was no funeral. No one was reaching out to me to say, I'm so sorry, that your mom died. So this had a really lasting impact on me, as you can imagine. And it actually wasn't until I started working in hospice care that I realized that I had a lot of unresolved grief. And it was in learning how to help other people with their grief that I was actually able to resolve a lot of my own grief. And in doing that work, I really came to see how grief affects all of us, right, at every life stage. But the older you get, the more likely it is that you have lost multiple people. And so that grief, especially if it hasn't been processed, it can become cumulative. And so, older adults especially can have a lot of unresolved grief, which keeps building on itself as more and more of their loved ones die over time. So it's an incredibly challenging life stage for someone who, hasn't had the support that they need in order to cope with their grief.
And that answer may kind of fold into this next question, but I'm curious, when you think about aging, what the role of faith and spirituality plays in helping people to navigate that journey. I guess not just aging, but grief specifically, since that's what you're familiar with.
Sure. Well, I think, if you look kind of, developmental science, they say that one of the main goals of our later chapters is to reflect back on our life and to look at what has given us meaning and purpose, right? To be able to say, okay, what was my life all about? Why did it matter? What did I accomplish? How did I make a difference in this world? And so I think especially for folks of faith, what we're really looking at in this life stage is how did my life story intertwine with God's story? right? How did I make a difference in this world? Not only in terms of helping other people or, building a positive legacy, but also how does my story intersect with the larger story of God's hope for this world? How was I able to do God's work in this world? And so I think, especially for older adults who are really looking for meaning and purpose, both reflecting back on their life and looking forward, faith can play a really huge role, because faith not only allows us to look back and say, oh, okay, I'm starting to see the pieces, right? I'm starting to see the ways in which, I did God's work over the years, or I'm starting to see the ways in which I had a positive impact in my faith community and in my wider community. But also, I'm able to really take a look at my life in terms of the meaning and purpose that it still has in this last stage of life. Because that's another grief that I see a lot of older adults really struggling to cope with, which is the grief of having lost their purpose, right? I know a lot of people who are on hospice who will say to me as their chaplain, why am I still here, right? I can't physically do the things that I used to do. I can't take care of other people anymore. I can't take care of myself. Now other people are taking care of me. I feel like a burden on my family and on my community. And this is heartbreaking, right? Because these are our
Yeah.
elders. These are folks who should be respected and cherished. But because of the way our society tends to value production, they no longer feel as though they have a meaning and purpose. And this is where faith has a huge role to play, right? Because when we are beloved children of God, our worth is not based in what we produce. Our worth is not based in our physical abilities. Our worth is based in the fact that we are loved by God and that we are part of the body of Christ, right? And our worth does not expire, right? So for folks of faith, I'm able to talk to them and I'm able to say, well, okay, it's true. You can't do the things physically that you used to be able to do. You are having to rely on the help of others. But honestly, that's okay. Because when we are part of the body of Christ, we are all interconnected, right? You have helped many people over the years. Now they're helping you. That's the way it's supposed to be, right? We are designed not to be separate individuals, but to be part of the body of Christ. We are designed to be able to help each other and lean on each other, right? This is how we were created. And the other part of it is, if they are people of faith, and not just specifically Christian. I know I'm using a lot of Christ language there because that's, my own personal faith background. But if you are a person of faith, then there are still things that you can do, even if you are physically unable to do the things that used to give you meaning and purpose, right? So, for example, I will say, okay, so you can't, you can't do the things you used to do, but what can you still do? Can you pray for people? Can you meditate? Can you send peaceful thoughts out into the world? Can you send good energy out into the world? Can you be kind to your neighbors? Can you smile at the people who care for you? If you can still do any of these things, that's meaning, that's purpose, right?
Yeah.
So I think being able to tap into that faith, whether it's Christian, whether it's non-Christian, being able to say, I still have meaning and purpose, and there are still things that I can do to help in this world. It changes the entire perspective of grief at this age. You're still going to be grieving those losses, right? You're still going to be grieving the
Sure.
loss of your independence, of your physical abilities, but you don't feel as though you have no purpose and no worth in this world. And
Right.
that makes all the difference.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I can imagine that is something that a lot of older adults, whether they're facing hospice or not, is sort of something that they grapple with. So you kind of step in and guide people, specifically who are in hospice, correct, through sort of those tough moments.
In hospice, but also out in the community as well. Through the listening place, we have people of all ages, including older adults, who come to us for grief support. And they might be grieving the death of a spouse. They might be grieving deaths of siblings. Often they're grieving multiple losses over many years. And so I work with them as well to try to help them, find ways to cope with that deep grief, and then also to find ways to be able to continue living with meaning and purpose, even in the midst of their grief.
Absolutely. Our episode is tentatively titled The Communities That Carry Us. What does that phrase mean to you, especially when we think about older adults?
Sure. Well, I think community is so important to us at every age, but I think especially for older adults, we as we age, we start to lose some of the communities that we have created for ourselves, right? So, for example, when you retire, you might lose touch with your old work friends. As you get older, you have friends and family who die, and so being able to have a community that is larger than just your family, your friends, your work network, can actually be incredibly crucial for older adults. So, whether that is a faith community, right, which is consistent over time, hopefully, right, in which you are able to stay with that community, or even if you have to move, as many people do these days, many faith communities are online, and so you can still worship in your faith community wherever you may have to move. You can still be connected to them in a certain way, and I think this is incredibly important, especially as for example, older adults may move away from their friends in order to be close to family who can care for them. If they have a faith community, and if that faith community is able to still connect with them online, that's a way in which they can maintain some of those connections virtually. If they're able to stay where they are, even when they become homebound, many faith communities will go and visit their folks who are homebound. So being able to have that consistent community for older adults is incredibly crucial. It's also why faith communities, I think, really need their congregations to be involved in the care of their elders, to recognize that, the church isn't just the people who are able to show up for worship. The faith community extends far beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so many congregations in our area are doing such a great job of that, but identifying needs that exist beyond the walls is super important. And I think it's interesting that you said that they can still connect virtually. That's not something that I had really thought about, but you're right, because a lot of church does happen virtually these days. So that is an option. Um,
Oh yeah, many
but it,
churches and mosques and synagogues are all able to, to live stream their worship services, and many of them during services they'll have chats, right? So you can connect during to chats, you can put in prayer requests, people will reach back out to you. So that again, it's just a way to help people with accessibility issues, right? Which our
right,
elders often over time, develop those issues, can maintain their community even if they can't physically be present.
right. What has your work with older adults taught you about resilience and faith in that community?
So I think regardless of what our faith background is, all of us are looking for something that's bigger than ourselves, right? All of us are looking for something that's larger than just our immediate network, right? We get a lot of meaning and purpose from our family and our friends, but we're all yearning, I think, to be part of something even bigger than that. And because of that, when we feel tapped into that, it allows us, I think, to weather a lot of life storms, right? Because there is comfort and strength that we can draw from feeling as though we're connected to something bigger than ourselves. Now, sometimes that's very tangible, right? Sometimes that's a faith community actually reaching out during a loss and saying, we're so sorry for your loss. We're here to support you. We have a grief support group, or we can get you connected to one. We send you cards. We pray for you. We're here for you, right? So sometimes it's in very tangible ways. Sometimes it's in, it's just in the spiritual connection, right? The feeling that there is something that will always support you, right? So, for example, the feeling that God will never let go of you, that no matter what you're going through, God is walking beside you through it and is carrying you through, right? Or the sense that the universe is innately good, so that even when we suffer enormous losses, we believe that they're only one part of the puzzle, right? That there isn't this nihilism that creeps in and says, I've lost so many things. What's the point? Instead, we have this sense of, yes, this hurts. This is real, and it's terrible, and it's not the end of the story. It's not the
Mhm.
only part of the story. And again, for people who believe in an afterlife, I think that also builds into resiliency for their faith, right? Because it is able to give us this sense of, this is one chapter of the story. It's a hard chapter, but it doesn't last forever. And it's not the last chapter.
Are you looking to connect with a community of listeners who understand the unique challenges of caregiving? We want to partner with you. By sponsoring We're at the Age, you'll connect with a dedicated audience of listeners and help make a real difference for those managing the challenges of elder care. So if you're looking to reach an engaged audience, We're at the Age is the perfect fit for your sponsorship. Reach out today and learn more about sponsoring an episode or a whole season. Visit voicestl.org/podcast. Do you have like a story you can share of someone that you supported recently, or just seeing a positive change in the guidance that you offered?
The hard part is choosing one. So what I will say is that I think a lot of people, when they think about grief support, they think that it is really involved, right? They think that most people are going to, really need a lot of help, are really going to need a lot from them, right? And I think some people that scares them a little bit. I think it if they have someone in their life who's suffered a loss, they're afraid to bring it up, right? Because they're like, okay, if I bring it up, I'm going to accept that, I'm going to upset them, the floodgates are going to open. I'm going to get stuck in this conversation that I don't really know how to navigate, so I'm just not going to say anything at all, right? Which I
Yeah.
think is the worst possible thing a person can do. We had a gentleman lately. His wife had passed away, and when she passed away, we always offer our bereavement services, right? This is where we follow up with someone for over a year after their loved one has died. And at the time he said, no, I'm okay. I've got my family. I've got my friends. I don't need extra support. Perfectly fine, right? But we kept him on our mailing list, as we always do. We just kind of like sent him little check-ins just to say, hey, we're here if you need us, right? Just a very gentle, unobtrusive way to say, just in case, we're always here. And several months later, he actually started coming to our grief support group. And he only came a couple times. He didn't really need more than that. But all he needed was to be able to talk about her, right? Because he found that with his friends and his family, it was sometimes a little hard to talk about her, right? People would get kind of awkward. They wouldn't bring her up, and then he didn't know how to bring her up.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that they weren't supportive, it's just that they didn't know how to start the conversation. So coming to a place where everyone was having the conversation, right? Where everyone was talking openly about the person that they loved, whose death they were grieving, having a space in which he could just say her name, share stories about her, talk about how much he missed her. That was all he needed, right? Like I said, he only came a couple times, but just that was enough. So I really want to encourage people to be open to having those conversations. You're not going to upset them by talking about their loved one. They're already upset, right? They're already grieving.
Right.
It's really quite the opposite. If you just say, hey, I've really been thinking about her lately, and I really miss her, and I know you do too. And I was just thinking about this thing that she used to do and how special that was. And I just wanted to reach out and let you know that I remember her and I remember you. That's a great way to open the conversation and just give someone the opportunity to talk about their loved one, the way they remember them and the way that they miss them. And very often that's all people need.
Yeah. That's really powerful. That the thought of, by bringing up the loved one, you're showing your love for that person.
Mm-hmm.
If you could encourage every faith community to take one step towards better supporting older adults, what would that look like?
I think probably it would be finding ways to make sure that older adults stay connected to the community, and being able to adapt to their changing needs over time, right? Because when people recently retire, sometimes they have extra time, sometimes they get more involved in their community, right? We really rely on our recent retirees a lot of times for, that faith community volunteership. But over time, they may be able to be less engaged in the faith community. But that's when we need to be more engaged, right? That's when we need to be proactive about finding ways to make sure that they still feel included in their faith community. And that can be something as simple as a card ministry where you send them cards, or a phone call ministry where you just reach out to them. Some faith communities have the ability to make visits. They have volunteers within their community who can go make home visits. I think that's probably the absolute best thing you can do. But even if your church doesn't have the resources, the volunteers to be able to do that, just making a phone call or sending a card to say, hey, you're still a part of our community. We remember and honor and cherish you, and we are still here with you and for you. I think that's incredibly important.
Absolutely. Those are some really great ideas. And we know from our work that people staying social and connected as they age is super important, even just for their physical health. Very important. So that's absolutely some really great ideas. And I hope somebody listening does that. We deal with a lot of cards at Voice. So card ministries, I love that. It's a great idea.
Well, I mean, there are so many things that faith communities can do if they have the resources. I've seen faith communities that have, senior days where they provide transportation so people can actually gather. I've seen them where they have groups of people that will go out and visit their folks who are in care homes, right? But, some churches just don't have the ability to do that. So a card ministry is just a simple and kind way of saying, we're still your community. We still love you and care about you.
What is what's like a day in your life?
Oh wow, it really depends on the day. So I do a lot of bereavement work. So a lot of my day will be making phone calls to people who are bereaved. I follow up with them for the first 13 months. So over those first 13 months, I am calling them periodically. I'm sending them information in the mail, resources on, healthy coping methods. I'm inviting them to our grief support group and our other grief support events. So, making those contacts with people is a big part of my day. Another big part of my day is just providing support for our staff and our volunteers. So in other words, making sure that they have the training and the support and the resources that they need in order to provide support for other people. So I'm always looking for more resources on how to provide support for different types of grief, right? Whether that is anticipatory loss, where you are, making your way towards the loss. It hasn't happened yet, but you know that it's coming, or whether that's very recent loss or sudden and unexpected loss. So even on hospice, we sometimes have, situations where everything happened very quickly and the family just didn't feel prepared.
Yeah.
We also have people who have been grieving for a long time. Maybe their loved one had Alzheimer's or another degenerative disease that takes place over a long period of time. A lot of times people will say, oh, well, when they actually pass away, I'll probably be fine because I've already been grieving them. And then their loved one dies and they're like, oh no, this is a totally different kind of grief.
Yeah.
I am still grieving, right? So a lot of my time also is just, finding resources to help people in different kinds of situations, and then training staff and volunteers on being able to provide support for a lot of different types of grief. I do sometimes still help out with chaplaincy visits. So sometimes I'll be going and making visits to people on hospice. So praying with them, talking with them, again, helping them to see their connection between the life that they've lived and their greater purpose, right? Whether that's, God, faith, the universe at large, right? So where has their life had meaning and purpose? Where does it fit into the larger picture, however they understand their spirituality? I do remembrance ceremonies. So sometimes I'll be designing ceremonies to remember and honor a person's life and help their loved ones and their communities grieve them. And then, of course, just all the logistical stuff behind the scenes, planning events, making sure everything is going smoothly. Yeah. So it's
What's your favorite
it's
part?
oh gosh. Honestly, this is gonna sound a little funny, but my favorite part actually is talking to people who are grieving. Um, every time I do a grief support group, I always at the end of it feel amazing, and people are like, "What?" The people are like, "That's really weird. Like, wouldn't that be like really emotionally draining work?" And actually, for me at least, it's just the opposite, right? Because when I'm with people, um, I'm able to hear how much they love person that they're grieving, right? So when we're talking, yes, I'm hearing the sadness, yes, I'm hearing the loss, yes, I'm hearing, all of the hard parts of grief, but I'm also hearing the love that they had for that person, right? Like we don't grieve people that we aren't connected to, right? We don't grieve
Right.
people that we don't care about. So being able to hear the love that they still have for these folks who are no longer with them, and then also just feeling as though I'm being able to help them along their grief support journey, that I'm giving them that space to grieve and to mourn, that I'm giving them the resources that might help them, to find healthy ways that work for them to move forward in their grief without having to forget the person that they're grieving, but instead being able to kind of take them along with them, to cherish their memory while still being able to find a new way of living without that person physically present. That's incredibly meaningful to me, and I honestly just love it.
That's great. And that's such a unique calling. So I'm so happy that you were able to find this work that's fulfilling to you and that's so incredibly helpful to people as well.
Well, thank you. I always tell people, a lot of times when people hear that I work in hospice, they're like, "Oh, that's so hard. I could never do that." The reality is, though, if you're called to something, you'll also be equipped for it, right? If it's what you're meant to be doing, you'll also find meaning and purpose and joy in it. So if you find yourself noticing that you're really good at listening to people, that you're really good at being able to hear them, but also not absorbing all of the sadness, right? But instead being
Hmm.
able to say, I hear the sadness, but I focus on the love, right? If you find yourself kind of gravitating in that direction, this may be exactly the right calling for you.
It's beautiful. How can people get involved with what you're doing or get on that 13-month contact list?
Yeah. Well, if they're interested in getting involved in grief support work, the best thing I can recommend is hospice volunteering, honestly. Unless you're part of a faith community that already has a grief support program, that's another great way to be involved. But hospices need volunteers. And many times their bereavement program too will need volunteers. So you can volunteer at your local hospice. They will be absolutely happy to train you and to guide you and to have you work alongside them. If you're in need of grief support, there are many resources, but one of the ones that I'll point out to people is that hospices are actually required by Medicare to provide free grief support to anyone in the community. It's not just to the families of people who have used their hospice services. Hospice bereavement care is free to anyone. So you can reach out to your local hospice and you can say, "Hey, I really need some grief support." And they will add you to their bereavement program. Most grief support groups are, open to the public, and so you can get connected and be invited to grief support groups. So a lot of people who are looking for grief support, they may not know that hospices actually offer free grief support to the community. So
Yeah, I
look
didn't
to
know.
that as a
That's
resource.
crazy.
Yeah, I know, and because it's supported by Medicare, right? Hospice is paid for through Medicare and Medicaid, and because of that, that means all of our services are free, right? So I am not a licensed therapist, and many bereavement coordinators like myself are not licensed therapists, but we have training in grief support. And so we can't be a replacement for counseling or therapy. But when it comes to grief, we can offer a lot of resources and they are completely free.
That's great. That's a fantastic resource. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing about what you do and sort of the intersection of faith and aging. Um, do you have any final thoughts?
I think my final thoughts are simply that, grief affects all of us. None of us are going to escape grief. right? If you love someone, anyone, eventually you will experience grief. And the same thing goes for aging, right? If we're lucky, we will all age, we will all become elders. And so, because these are such universal experiences, I think there's also a lot of meaning and value in them. You know, we live in a culture that is very youth obsessed and that is very like good vibes only, right? Um,
Mhm.
but the reality of human experience is that it encompasses all of these things: youth and age, happiness and grief. And so, if we
Mhm.
can learn to embrace all of it, to not avoid our grief, to not avoid our sadness, to not avoid our age, right? I think we actually have a much more healthy approach to life. And for many people who are people of faith, this is built into our faith beliefs, right? Um, you know, most faiths of the world are not youth obsessed, right? Instead, many of them look to their elders for wisdom. Most faiths of the world do not say to avoid grief. Instead, they give us ways to lament. They give us rituals that we can walk through together. They give us communities that support us through these important life stages. So again, our faith is an enormous resource to us when we are faced with a wider society that doesn't know how to gracefully age, that doesn't know how to grieve together. Our faith does. Our faith knows how to grieve. Our faith knows how to age into wisdom. So lean into it, right? Don't get sucked into, you know, the culture of youth and good vibes. Instead, remember all of the resources that your faith has for you when it comes to being able to live a meaningful life that includes grief, that includes old age, that finds that all of these things are a normal and natural and sometimes even beautiful part of what it means to be a human being.
Yeah, that's great. I was speaking on a recent podcast episode with a music thanatologist about how people don't really know how to navigate watching someone die or having someone die because we've moved it into the hospitals and it's not something people experience very often. And I think the same can be said of grief and of the how tough that can be to navigate. Without faith, there's a lot of questions there. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of like, I'm just going to push this aside and I'll be okay. And so I think it's really important work that you're doing to help people to navigate how to grieve and how to continue to live well, even with grief.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, even our faith communities, not all of them are very good at it, right? You know, some faith communities, um, even though they have the traditions, even though they have the scriptures and the sacred writings available to them that help us with grief, that really focus on grief and that focus on old age, they don't necessarily draw them into their daily life. So if I could give another piece of advice to faith communities, it would be to utilize those things in the daily life of your church, right? To not just make it about, oh, it's All Saints Day, we're going to remember the people who died, but instead say, hey, we read, for example, we read the Psalms, we also read Lamentations. These holy scriptures tell us how to grieve. They show us grief. They're not something that we just do occasionally. These are things that we use in the life of our faith community on a regular basis, so that we don't just talk about grief when it happens, but instead we recognize that it's as natural a part of being human as breathing and eating, right? We live, we love, we die. So if we can just accept this as part of the natural part of what it means to be human, and all of the resources that our faith traditions give us for being able to cope with those things, I think we'll all be a lot better off.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Julie. I appreciate all of your insights that you've shared today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.